Nice to meet you.
Ben.
And Marie. Somebody need some American speaking person needs to teach me how to pronounce my name.
No, you know how to pronounce your name. It's spelled like Marie.
Oh, Marie.
Yeah.
Well, I just have an accent.
Yeah, but how do you say it?
I say Marie. Yeah.
All right, folks online, hi, welcome. We're glad you're here. I'm hoping that you all have the ability to unmute, and you should feel free to do so. If you have questions, feel free to stop me anytime. You can also type in the chat, although I won't see it. Emily's going to be looking, so she'll let me know. And you all in the room obviously jump in whenever you want. So we're going to talk about career planning. Hi, welcome. One thing I think it's really important to recognize early when we talk about career plans is that we all tend to think that career paths look like this, just like super straight. This is how it works. I do this step and then I do this step and then I do this step. And this is essentially never reality, right? Like maybe there are a couple of people out there for whom it's been like this, but generally not. Talk to anybody in science and they'll say, oh no, it wasn't what I thought. Usually it's more like this twisty route. For me in science, that looked like, I started in chemistry. I did my undergrad in chemistry, and then I worked in biophysics and virology before I kind of went through a few steps on my way to molecular biology, and then took a huge turn into training. And even within training, I worked with high school students, I worked with grad students for a long time, I worked with postdocs. So it's a very windy path. And I realize for those of you who weren't in the room, I don't think I even introduced myself. I just told you my life story. I'm Laura Marler. I'm the director of postdoc services here at NIH. But so I think that's really important for expectation setting because we hear about this career ladder, but the reality is that it's more like this complex trial and error filled jungle gym where hopefully it's fun, hopefully it's a fun process, but there is uncertainty baked in that can make that challenging. And it also means that to make good career decisions, you really need to know yourself well. And that's a process. You don't always know at the start. You don't always know yourself and you don't always know all the options. And that's part of why we see that windy path because you don't have all the information to make the decision at the start. So first, allow for that. There'll be some windiness. And second, the more you do to know yourself well and know your options, the better informed of a decision you can make. So this is kind of how I think about the process of career planning. You make sure that you know yourself and that you know your options, and then you start to do exploration. And that exploration piece is really important because it helps you know yourself better. It helps you know your options better, helps you figure out, well, this is what I thought this career would be like, but is it really like that? Exploration usually takes the form of doing a lot of informational interviews, talking to people who are really in those jobs and saying, what is it really like? How did you get here? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And sometimes it takes the form of trying it on, doing an internship or a detail, finding a way to practice that for a little while to see, okay, is that actually what I want? And then when you know what direction you want to go, then you're going into your job search, right? You accept a position and then it starts over because you start thinking about the next thing, especially at this training level. You're kind of thinking, many of you, if you're a postdoc or if you're a postbac or if you're a grad student, you got here and I'm guessing you're already thinking, okay, well, but what's next? What does that next step look like? So it is iterative. I want to just kind of take a minute to recognize that this is a challenging process. And it's challenging for a lot of reasons. There's a lot of uncertainty that comes with it. And knowing yourself really well can be uncomfortable. Asking really good questions about what am I good at? What am I not good at? What fits for me? And where have I had really negative experiences? Why were they negative? That's an uncomfortable process just to know yourself really well. And then there's the other piece of even if I figure out I really want that, how do I get there? How do I make that happen? There's uncertainty around that. And so that uncertainty makes this really difficult. It also is difficult because transitions are uncomfortable. And when we talk about career planning, it is necessarily in a transitional space. You're thinking about moving to something else, and that's uncomfortable. Sometimes we get into a little bit of a sunk cost fallacy. If you are considering moving outside of research for your next step, sometimes that can feel really difficult because you start to think about how many years you spent in research, how much time you've put into that, and that sunk cost fallacy can make this challenging. Sometimes we get hit by something called the streetlight effect, which is basically there's a story about a person who loses their keys, right? Somebody comes along and says, "Oh, here, let me help you look." And they're looking all around under the streetlight, and then they don't find anything. And eventually the person says, are you sure you lost them right here? And they say, "Oh, no, I lost them over there. It's just that the light is here." Right? So sometimes we're only looking where the light is because we only know about certain things. Many of you, if not all of you, have spent a long time in academia. We know a lot about academia, but sometimes we get that streetlight effect where we're only really looking at what we already know, rather than really exploring all the options. And then another thing that makes this really challenging is that the stakes are really high. You all need a job for many reasons, right? You probably need money. Some of you, immigration outcomes may rely on this, and you want to feel productive and like you're moving forward in your career. There are a lot of reasons that this feels really high stakes. And one of those reasons is that we often equate our career outcomes with our self-worth, right? That's something that can get really blurry, and we definitely do it in the sciences. I wouldn't say we're the only ones, but we definitely do it, where we start to really identify with our role as a scientist. And so that means that this feels really high stakes, not just for the reasons I talked about, finances, et cetera, but also because if this doesn't work, who am I, right? And if I want to do something different, who am I? If I feel like I maybe don't want to be at the bench, how does that interact with my idea of myself? And so there are a lot of things that can make this really difficult. That feeling of really high stakes often comes from a sense that my job is my life. This is what I do. And so I want to take a minute to say that it's okay if your job isn't your whole life, and it's okay if you don't find something that feels perfect. I think that we get a lot of messages about careers that tell us that we should feel like we won the lottery every morning when we go to work. And I'm going to tell you, almost no job will always feel like that. Maybe no job will always feel like that, right? And so there's this idea, and if you struggle with this book, The Good Enough Job, can be a helpful one. Basically, a job is a lot of things, right? It's a source of monetary benefits. It lets you pursue passions within your work. It may be something that gives you a work-life balance that lets you pursue other passions outside of your work. It can be somewhere that you find fulfillment, but it may not be the place you find all of your fulfillment. And oh, hi, are you talking to me? If not, I'm going to ask you to mute, or maybe Emily can mute you. Thanks. If you have a question, feel free to jump in though. So there are a lot of pieces of this and a lot of things to consider as you go into it. One of the big things that I want you all to think about is, how do you define success? And I have you underlined here because we all come with messages about what success means, what it means to succeed in your family, in your culture, in your research group, in, the messages that you've gotten throughout your career. But it's definitely worth sitting down to think about, what does success mean for me? What would make me feel successful? And what would be satisfying? That's the place to start with career exploration. What does success actually look like for me? And what that typically will look like is this intersection of your interests, your skills, your values, and your personality, right? That little bit of the intersection in that Venn diagram, that's your ideal career for now. It could change. And we do change over our lives. So that's okay. But where you can use your interests and your skills in a position that aligns with your values, that's often where you're going to find success and satisfaction. But that means you have to know a lot. You have to know what you're interested in. You probably are asking yourself that question. You have to know what your skills are. What are you actually good at? Maybe you know, but you might want to get some input and feedback. And you have to know your values. What do you care about? What makes you feel really energized? What makes you feel like you're doing meaningful work? And so that intersection of skills, interests, and values is how we make career decisions. There's more that goes into it. You know, as I mentioned before, it is what you know. What have you been exposed to? Stereotypes can come in here. If you have always heard messages about what women can do, what people from your culture can do, you know, stereotypes can impact those decisions, and it's important to recognize that and think about it. Like I said before, messages from your culture, your religion, your friends and family, things that you've seen in media, current events, feels like a big one this year. All of these things impact those decisions. And so that's important to kind of recognize as reality and consider as you think about this. So I'm actually going to be quiet for a few minutes and ask you all to spend, we'll just do like 2 minutes reflecting on what are some of those messages that you got and that you internalized growing up or coming through your career about your career options. You can write if it makes sense to you. Right. So anybody have one they want to share? Sure.
It's not so much about growing up, but just by having been in science and research for a decade now, I kind of learned, I mean, there is always a message that science is what you are good at. Like you are good at doing research. You are good, that's what your niche is. And over the final stage of my PhD and the transition period, I kind of realized that the skills that I developed over my PhD are not as much research as conflict resolution, performing under stress. I've become an excellent crisis manager. Like all this, I didn't choose.
I'm sorry.
I have become it.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me look outside of that window, outside of that streetlight that you just mentioned.
Hmm. Yeah. So the message there being basically a message about what your skills are.
Yeah, the message
Right.
is like staying
Right.
in touch to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And we'll talk a little bit more later about transferable skills and the tremendous amount of them that we create, that we gain in research.
Kind of internalized. It's like, like the traditional career pathway that have always been around academics.
Hmm.
My parents are also academics. So yeah, that's kind of all I know. And then I kind of internalized like, oh, there's this pathway, like you do a postdoc and get a job at a university and you run a lab. And that's like
Sure.
all I know. And then it's kind of hard to look outside that, even though I want to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Anybody else? Folks online, you can unmute too.
I have one in the chat. It says,
Yeah.
I'm afraid of exploring or jumping out of a comfort zone or being labeled as unsuccessful. So I have been staying in the conventional academic path the whole time.
Sure. Yeah, a fear of failure in something new. Yeah. This is something that I recommend you all spend a little more time just kind of thinking through. And I think it helps just to see those things, right? Chances are you know the answers, but maybe you haven't thought about them in this format and in relation to your career exploration. So if you like to journal, do some journaling on this or just spend a little time thinking about it. A lot of the time we hear messages about, I hear people give answers like this. So just do what makes you happy, follow your passion, right? Or money does or doesn't bring happiness, right? People have really different ideas about the role of money in success and what they want and need there, what the hot jobs are right now, what is happening in the market. Um, when you're thinking about a transition, things like that costs too much, that takes too much time, that's, you already invested this much time in this career. Um, like you said about talents, you're so good at this, you should do this, right? Um, what kind of support you can expect from family and friends and people who are important to you. Um, expectations about work-life balance. Well, if you do that, you'll never see your family. And we expect you to become a specific thing, right? People get all kinds of messages, and some of these have some basis in reality, probably. And that's where those informational interviews can be really important to find out, well, is it true I'll never see my family? How do you make that work? Those kinds of things. And so when you think about this career decision process, you want to start really broad with, just looking at what's out there, thinking about all of those options, of course, doing the self-assessment and then starting to focus in over time, right? You don't want to stay really broad. If you're a postdoc, you don't want to end year 5 really broad. I hope that you're focusing in, but start broad. And if you have time, then it's okay to spend a little more time broad. And if you don't have as much time, you may need to focus a little faster to and as you focus, then you're really thinking about, well, I think this area looks interesting. What are the skills I need to go that direction? Right? You kind of almost thinking of it as a bridge. I'm here. I'd like to be over there. What do I need to get there? And how do I build that bridge? What are the pieces I need? Do I need some skills that I don't have? Do I need experience that I don't have? Do I need information that I don't have? How do I build the bridge to get there? But that comes after the exploration piece. So I think of this in 4 steps. And the first one, your self-analysis, you're really going to think about your skills, your interests, and your values. And so when you think about your skills, this is where you have really the most ability to influence things because you can, you folks with a PhD or here at NIH, you can learn. We know you can learn. And so that means that you can really change what your skills are. That said, you want to do an honest assessment of, what are the things that I'm already good at? What are the things I think I might need? How can I find ways to improve in those, right? Um, and then possibly even making a list. Here are things that I think are highly developed for me. If I wanted to go this direction, here are the skills I already have. Here are the things that are less developed for me. If I wanted to go this direction, I'm going to need more work on these things, right? And having that information can really help because as you start to make career decisions and think about longer term, you get to decide how much more you want to invest in improving those less developed skills, right? But if you don't improve them, then you need to go this direction where you already have skills developed, right? And so that's something that you will choose. But being good at something doesn't always mean that you like it. And if you don't like it, it doesn't mean you have to do it just because you're good at it, but it may mean that you have to put more effort into developing other skills. And so Marie made the excellent point that we in research gain a lot of skills that are not just pipetting or coding or doing Western blots, right? You all are gaining skills in editing, in communicating, being able to not just communicate effectively, but communicate really complex ideas effectively, to write concisely, getting that abstract down to 200 words or whatever it is, identifying problems, working through problems, identifying resources, gathering information, and project management types of things that you all do that I think we kind of overlook, like setting good goals, planning out timelines, moving a project towards completion, analyzing and evaluating data. Obviously, you do that all the time. Some of you are managing collaborations and, really doing more of the interpersonal piece of this, mentoring, possibly supervising if you have a postback or something like that. Delegating responsibility, whether that's within a collaboration or to somebody that you're mentoring. Some of you may be teaching, and if you aren't now, you might have in the past. Motivating others. And I would say also managing up, right? Learning how to get your PI to do the thing you actually really need them to do. That's a skill you're all gaining. Just organizing and attending to details, that's something that you probably have down because you've come this far in research. And initiating new ideas, being creative. This is a short list. There are tons of things that you are learning in your research that are not research skills. And those set you up well to go a lot of different directions. There are a million things you can do with a PhD, or with biomedical research training. So there are assessments that can be helpful here, like a skills inventory worksheet. When I send these slides, you'll have all these links. I'll give a disclaimer that none of these assessments that I'm sharing are the be all end all. I don't want any of you to use an assessment and then say, well, the assessment said that I should do, right? Like that's not what it's for. But it is a tool for self-reflection and to kind of help you get started with assessing where you are. And so these are some questions you can use as you think through that. When have I felt most energized and confident and capable? What are the things I do in my research now that I really enjoy and that I really feel great about, that I leave saying, yeah, I did that really well. And get specific about that as you think about it. And then what feedback do I get from other people? What have my supervisors and mentors told me that I'm good at? What do I hear from others in the lab that feels like genuine feedback where they said, oh, wow, that was amazing. And then similarly, what do I want to develop further? And after you have those things in mind that you want to develop, get specific about how you're going to get there, right? What are my goals for developing those skills? And then the second part of this is your interests, right? What you actually like to do, what you would enjoy on a day-to-day basis. And like I said before, if you don't have the skills, that's okay. They can be learned. Jobs often combine multiple interests. I mean, as an example, I work in training scientists. So I get to use my scientific interest, even though I'm not doing science. When I look at other training positions, a job training people to do like a business task doesn't interest me at all. I would never enjoy that job. But training in the science field, I love. And so there will be those things where just because it has one skill set, it doesn't mean that it's encompassing all of your interests. And interests don't always equal vocations. What I mean by that is that it's okay if you like things that you will never make money from, right? That's fine. That's what hobbies are for. Go do it. You don't have to find one job that encompasses all your interests. And you don't even necessarily have to find a job that encompasses a lot of your interests, as long as it interests you enough that you can enjoy doing it, right? You can hit those other interests in other ways in your life. So as you think about this one, you can think about, what do you really love to spend time doing, right? And think broadly about that. I think that when I ask this question, sometimes those other interests I just mentioned, people kind of discount immediately, right? I love playing the piano, but that's not what this is about. But just make the whole list. What are the things that you love and that energize you? And then you can look at what the connections are, what the commonalities are there. How does that play in? So when I was in research, I used to think, yeah, I do love working with people, but that's not really, that's going to come in with collaborating, right? But when I really started to look at other options, suddenly training looked amazing because I get to talk to people all day long. And so those other things may come in a way that isn't necessarily exactly what you expect, but it's still worth considering them. Think about when you get into a flow state. And then you can start to think about what is vocational versus avocational, right? What's likely to actually come into a job. But starting out, just think really broadly. And again, you can use an interest assessment. Something like this World of Work map can be useful. RIASEC is one that we use. If you meet with a career counselor here, they can help you walk through something like this. Again, it's not a diagnosis, it's not a direction, it's a tool for self-reflection. Oh, and this is another one, science-specific interests. So Bioscience Careers has a good one that can kind of walk you through some, if you're doing this, here are other things that you might like to. And many of you may be familiar with Science Careers, My IDP. If you haven't done this, I recommend it. It can be a good tool as well for self-reflection and also just for helping you recognize some of the options that are out there. Because when you do this, even if PI is the number one thing that comes up, there are going to be like 10 others. I can't remember what list it gives you, maybe 15 that it will rank for you. And so then you see a lot of the options and get to start to think through, well, these skills and interests that I've identified, here's how they might fit in these types of careers. Here are some careers that might fit with those. And there are a million of these interest assessments. So it's something that you can use as a tool. And then you want to think about your values, right? And this is really personal, and it's something that we often ignore. When we think about careers, we think about what am I good at? What do I like? We don't always think about what are my values. But this is the one that if you don't pay attention to it, it has the biggest impact on your satisfaction long term. If you are in a career that doesn't align with your values, chances are you will not feel career satisfaction there. An example for myself, like I said, if I was training for a business task, I wouldn't be interested in that. Similarly, when I was thinking about careers, I personally was really drawn to government and NIH specifically because I care about our mission. And this is something that I feel really, it's a deep value for me that I'm training people to be the next generation of scientists that change biomedicine. In a different position, I doubt I would feel that connection to the values of it. And so having that value match, it really matters. If you think about a position and it doesn't match your values, you're probably not going to love it long term. And when you think about values, you want to think about things like the work environment. What's the nature of the physical work and what's the company culture? So it's not just about does the work mission feel meaningful, although it is about that, but it's also what's the work-life balance like? What's the company culture like? What's the physical place I'm working like? What's the content of the work? What are the kinds of relationships that you're going to be able to make in the workplace and the interaction? For some people, being a medical writer who works remotely would be the perfect job because they have a lot of flexibility and it might work really well with their lifestyle and their values. But for other people, that would be the worst possible job because they never see anyone else ever. And so just thinking about how that fits in for you. And then your intrinsic and personal values. So, what your working style is, your lifestyle, your personal life. Money also comes in here. And for some people, making money is part of this equation. And for some people, it isn't. And I want to do my best to destigmatize that and ask you all to be honest with yourselves when you think about those decisions. Because if money and making money is part of your values around work, you will not be happy if you don't consider it while you make career decisions. So obviously you need to make some amount of money to be able to live and do the things you want to do. But if that's part of your value system, you need to acknowledge that, even though for some reason we do really stigmatize that. We all do work for money. Like, let's just be honest. And so thinking about what you need in terms of values and making a list of kind of 3 to 5 things that are your core values for work can be really useful. And then recognize that those may change over time. When I was a grad student, I was that person who was in lab way too much of my time. And I now have a 3 and a 5-year-old, and I am not that person at all. My values around work-life balance really changed. And so your values may change over time, and that's okay. That may change what you want in a job, and that's okay. That's part of the growth of being a person and part of your career growth. It's not really likely that a job will meet every need that you think of in this list, but it's really going to help you narrow down what could be good for you. And there are inventories for this too. So here are some tools you can use if you find that helpful. I think this part is a little depressing, but I do think it's important. The consequences of not doing this kind of self-exploration and really asking yourself what you enjoy, what fits your values, and what would be a good career for you are pretty big, because we spend something like 100,000 hours in our work over a lifetime. And it is unfortunately a lot more hours than we spend with our family or the people we have chosen to do life with. This is a lot of time, and you don't want to spend that time being miserable, right? You want that to be something that brings you meaning, that you enjoy, that you want to do, right? You're not going to feel like you won the lottery every morning, but at least you want to be there. And so take the time to really do that process and think about what that looks like for you. Okay, that's more of the same. So I'm not going to belabor it that much, but you can see it there. And so doing that reflection, what do I find fulfilling? What are some of the problems that I think I want to work on? What changes do I want to make? What kind of environment or conditions do I want to work in? And how much responsibility do I want? Am I somebody who is very ambitious and wants to move up, or am I going to be somebody who maybe doesn't want to manage people, and that doesn't sound interesting to me? Thinking about those kind of things too. And after you've done that, then it makes sense to start the real exploration, right? That first step is so important. And I think often we dive into what's out there, but you still have to get there. So once you've done that self-analysis, then going into career exploration and thinking about what are the options, right? There are tons of ways to find possible career options. I gave you some already with like the MyIDP. Meeting with a career counselor here in OITE is a good way to start a process like that. Talking with people that you know, using your network, looking at LinkedIn, just thinking about what jobs are out there. Think about where money flows in science and what kinds of positions exist along those routes, right? You can look at job ads. That's not a bad way. Now, you can still succumb to the streetlight effect looking at job ads, but if you start to broaden and just kind of look at what's out there, that gives you a pretty good idea. And then as you start to get towards focusing, that's when you want to be looking at job ads specifically for what are they asking for? What do they want for those jobs? And then talking to people who are in those kinds of positions and doing those informational interviews. So I have a list here. It's a short list. Obviously, there's a lot more that you could do, but we see a lot of people move into things like healthcare delivery or management, obviously research and development, administration, education, policy, business, venture capital, writing, law, consulting. There's more that could be added here, but that's just kind of the short answer. I should say the career symposium, which was unfortunately postponed during the shutdown, is going to be rescheduled in May. And that is a great opportunity to start to examine this because we try to bring people who are often, many of them are NIH alums who have gone into every career path we could think of in biomedicine. And so that's a really great opportunity to do some of this exploration and hear from people who are in those career paths. And then as you think about any given option, you want to think about how that matches with the skills and values and interests that you have already spent some time thinking about. And so what I mean by that is if you think, oh, science writing seems interesting, then remember that there's everything from a technical writer, which, like I mentioned, might be fully remote working alone kind of a writing position to being a director of communications for a university, right? Those are both science writing, but they look totally different. They're going to fit totally different skills, values, and interests. And so choosing a direction doesn't always mean that, there's no one direction that I would say, oh, well, if these are your skills, values, and interests, you can't go this direction. Every one of these avenues has so many jobs within it that could match the things that you're looking for. And then you can start to ask, how do I get there, right? Like I said earlier, how do I build that bridge? So what are the skills I'm going to need? And how am I going to build those, right? And so again, doing those informational interviews, looking at job ads, thinking about what's needed, and then setting some good goals and setting them in kind of a, what am I going to do this year? And then what am I going to think about 3, 5, 10 years. As you get further out, it gets more nebulous, and that is totally appropriate, right? You should not have a perfect detailed plan for 10 years from now, but having a general idea and some general goals is a good plan. So when you think about these goals, you want them to be something that actually helps you move toward where you're going, right? And so you can think about those long range goals. And then as you come back into, well, what am I actually going to do this year? Well, what am I going to do this month? Then you want to get to something more like a SMART goal where you're making it specific and measurable enough that you know when you've done it. And it's relevant because it matches those long-term goals that you've set, but it's also realistic and time-bound, meaning you've given yourself a deadline. And so what I mean by that is that you're not just going to say, I'm sorry, I got to get rid of these transitions. You're not just going to say, I'm going to get a job in science writing in 5 years, but you're going to say, this month, I'm going to make sure I network with 3 people to get a little more understanding of what it's like in science writing. Or I'm going to take this step towards publishing something to start to build my portfolio, so that you have those specific action items that you're moving towards. And then as you get closer to that, obviously you're going to start to think about the actual job applications, right? That's down the road. But as you do that, sorry, this is wrong, but use our resources for helping with job documents, with CVs and resumes, and getting ready for those things. And remember that there aren't right or wrong answers here. And so it's also okay if the very next thing isn't the perfect thing. And I think that sometimes when we get sort of paralyzed in the decision process, it's because we're putting so much weight on that next job. And the first job out of training can feel like a really big deal. And it is a big deal, but it's also mutable. It's okay if you stay in that job a year and learn more about your skills and values and interests and what you do and don't like about it. And then you look for the next thing. That's both fine and normal. So don't feel like that next step has to be the last one. It probably shouldn't be the last one. Remember that one career path won't give you everything that you need. And that's okay. It's important to know what your needs are and then to look for ways that your whole life can fill those. We meet some needs outside of work and we can change jobs and careers. And then most important, remember that the only person you actually have to make happy with this decision is you. You're the one who is going to live those 100,000 hours. So I have a lot of resources at the end here of things to look into. What questions do you all have? Mhm. Yeah, yeah, we'll send it out later.
Yes, okay, so one thing that's been worrying me a lot lately is like how jobs are changing with AI. So like I was interested in doing like, so I like making like big scientific figures. So I was thinking like going into publishing. And now I'm like a bit worried about, like how can I like develop my skills so that I can still be employable in
Yeah.
5 years' time.
Yeah, and you're very right that this is a challenging time to know exactly what that post AI world is going to look like. I don't think we really know yet. What I would say is talk to people in the field. What are they worried about? What are they planning? What are they thinking? And then diversify as much as you can, right? When you build a broad skill set, then you just feel a lot safer moving forward. Yeah. I don't know what publishing is going to look like.
Can you maybe give an example of what you consider as values? Because I'm thinking kind of two dimensions. One dimension is that my value is to make the world a better place and reduce human suffering, right? And another dimension is like my value is make enough money to support my family. So what kind of, what did you mean when you said values?
Yeah, I mean both of those.
So it's
And-
kind of an open and
Because if you imagine if your value is that you want to be doing something that reduces human suffering, if you don't hit that, chances are you're not going to be happy doing something that makes no moves towards that in the long term. But if you don't make enough money to support your family, you're also not going to be happy. So yeah, in a case like that, you need both.
so you would kind of define values as what's important to me, kind of as an open.
Yeah, like what are the things that are going to impact your satisfaction in a job? Yeah. Other questions?
Could you maybe give like an outline of like what OITE does in terms of like the different stages of career planning? Because I know you mentioned like the interviews, so I guess
Mhm.
I like to like one-to-one meetings, so that's kind
Yeah.
of
So we have career counselors in OITE, and all of them work with scientists all day long. So they won't give you the kind of like, well, we did this interest assessment and it looks like you're good at science, right? It's not that. But they can help you with some of those assessments. So they can really help at the exploration stage with just what's out there. What should I be thinking about that I haven't considered? Even having a conversation to talk through skills and values and interests. They're happy to do that. As you move forward, they can help with the narrowing down, right? If you want to, if you're thinking about informational interviews and you feel like, how do I even get started doing that? Well, we give a talk on that. You can look on the YouTube page, but they could also talk with you about that or do a practice one. When you've decided and you're really focusing in, they can help talk you through analyzing a job ad. Um, I'm seeing these 5 positions that look pretty interesting, but they fit my skills in different ways. Am I really competitive enough? I'll tell you, if you meet roughly 70% of the job ad, you should apply because you're almost never going to meet 100%. But if you need that kind of help thinking through it, they can help with that. When you're actually applying, they can look at your job documents, so CVs, resumes, cover letters, help with editing those. When you're interviewing, they can help you with mock interviews. They can help you talk about negotiations and think about the money side of it. Basically, the whole process.
You have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
Lauren says, I've heard a lot about how the job market right now is so horrible and it's better to wait to transition out if you can. I'm curious if this is similar to other points in time and if there's anything we can do to stand out or mitigate how hyper competitive everything seems.
It is a hard market. It is, and I don't want to sugarcoat that at all. It doesn't mean people aren't finding jobs. I have seen people find positions and move. As far as whether to wait or not, it's a very personal decision that depends on what your timeline is like, what you're looking for. If you want to come talk to me about it, you're welcome to. I would say it's always okay to send some feelers out, right? I mean, do those informational interviews. You should be building your network if you're thinking about being on the job market soon. So make sure that you have a good sense of what the market is really like in the jobs that you're considering applying to and what level you could be competitive for, so you know what kind of ads you should actually apply for. But then start to do some feelers, right? When you see a job that feels like, oh wow, that really fits what I'm looking for and I can be competitive for this one, apply. I recognize that that takes time and effort. And what I don't want is that you spin your wheels for a year and feel burnt out when you really need to apply. So don't necessarily go all out unless you're ready, but just, kind of be keeping an eye out. Having that good sense of the job market and having your network ready is the perfect way to spend, I'd say, kind of like the year before you expect to apply, right? Because then you have a sense of what's going on. You're used to seeing the market. You're used to, you kind of have your documents ready. I would say in almost any field, that's a good idea. If you're thinking about faculty positions, apply one cycle before you think you're really ready, because it almost always takes a couple of cycles and you learn a lot going through the process. If you're thinking about policy positions, it's going to take you time to figure out what all the fellowships are and who you need to talk to and how to apply for those. And oh, I missed the deadline. Just start a year before you really feel ready. Also, we almost never feel ready, so start a year before you feel ready. Did that help at all? You can come talk to me if you want to kind of talk about details.
That's super helpful. Thank you. I
Sure.
really appreciate it. It was a great answer.
Other questions? I actually finished on time for once. Okay, well, I'll say, oh yeah, go ahead.
No.
Yeah, okay. Bottom
Another
line.
one in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
A values question as well. There can be a situational need that might not lead to long-term satisfaction. What are some indicators of long-term values?
Oh, I understand. So, I mean, you can think through that, right? And if it's situational in the sense of like, I have a newborn and what I need this year is very different than what I'm going to need even just next year, you already know that's situational, right? You know, because of the way it came about, that it's not going to be forever. Sometimes I talk to people who say, I have all of these symptoms I'm suddenly dealing with, and I don't have a diagnosis yet. I don't know how this is going to affect my long-term career. I don't know if this is short-term or long-term. Uh, that's really challenging. If you're in a situation like that, get some mentorship and help, find some people to talk to. But also, it's okay to address a situational need because it's real, right? Even if it's only for a year and it's only for a year, it's still real for that year. And so if you need to make a choice that addresses that situational need, that's what you need then. And you can always change something later. I'm not advocating that everybody jump around jobs all the time. I think that's very stressful and painful in the long run. But I am definitely advocating that if you move into something that you aren't happy with, or it fit a need for you at the time and a year later it looks different, then start looking at what would fit your needs better. Okay, so bottom line, work on what makes you happy. Do the self-assessment and use your resources. Come talk to us when we can help. And good luck. Yeah, of course. Thank you. Good to meet you all.